In the summer of 1944, 29-year-old Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. was on his second combat tour, piloting a PBY-4 on anti-submarine patrols. Eager for more action, he was intrigued when he learned about a top-secret program designed to turn aging bombers into flying bombs. Kennedy wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. Flying a modified bomber loaded with 21,000 pounds of explosives required the crew to guide the volatile aircraft to an altitude of 2,000 feet, arm the payload, and then parachute to safety as a mothership took remote control. Many before him had lost their lives in catastrophic accidents, yet volunteering came with rewards. Each mission counted as 5 combat flights, accelerating a pilot's tour and the chance to earn a bravery medal. Whether it was the opportunity to finish his combat tour or a determination to contribute to an innovative mission, Kennedy stepped forward. On August 12, 1944, he and his co-pilot, Lieutenant Wilford J. Willy, climbed aboard for the ultimate gamble. One misstep, one spark, and the mission could be their last. Wunderwaffe. By the late spring of 1944, the D-Day landings had secured a foothold in northern France, while Soviet forces surged across Eastern Europe, driving relentlessly toward Berlin. On June 13th, the citizens of the English town of Swanscombe were enjoying an unremarkably warm afternoon. Mere days after the Battle of Normandy, and long after the once terrifying days of the Blitz, the residents were more sure now than ever before that the war was going favorably for the Allies. Suddenly, the peaceful afternoon was interrupted by an unfamiliar sound. It began as a powerful, throbbing hum that rippled through the air, prompting curious neighbors to look up to the sky for its source. Without warning, the noise ceased abruptly, and following a brief moment of eerie silence, a thunderous explosion marked the arrival of something new and terrifying. This was the debut of the newest Nazi Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapon, the Vergeltungswaffe 1, or V1. A compact, unmanned aircraft with stubby wings, it carried a warhead packed with over 1,700 pounds of explosives and could travel hundreds of miles towards its targets. Over the next 9 months, thousands and thousands of these so-called buzz bombs rained down on southern England, turning the skies into a source of constant dread. Though Allied fighters intercepted some and anti-aircraft defenses took out others, far too many reached their targets, leveling homes and shattering lives. Before long, the V1 was joined by its successor, the V2 rocket. Unlike the buzz bomb, the V2 would rise high above the clouds, invisible and untouchable, before plummeting its supersonic speeds to deliver its devastating payload, all without warning. The psychological impact of these weapons was profound. Entire neighborhoods could be reduced to rubble in an instant. With these devices out in the open, every minimal rumble in the distance could signal an impending attack, weighing heavily on civilians and military planners alike. Pushed to their limits, Allied Command launched Operation Crossbow, an effort to destroy launch sites hidden across occupied Europe. But these sites were well defended, cleverly camouflaged, and impervious to conventional bombing. With each failure, frustration turned to desperation. The Allies needed a new approach, capable of pinpoint precision and overwhelming force against specific, high-value targets. A radical concept emerged, leading to one of the war's most daring and controversial operations. Aphrodite and Anvil. Within weeks, British morale buckled under the devastation unleashed by the V-weapons. The ceaseless attacks shook the nation's confidence, prompting General Dwight D. Eisenhower to act decisively and elevate Operation Crossbow to a top priority, despite fierce objections from Lieutenant General Carl Spaatz, commander of the United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, who argued that the campaign was an utter waste of resources. To him, the escalating threat of Nazi technological advancements demanded a more unconventional approach. The proposed solution was audacious: convert aging B-17 flying fortresses and PBY-4 bombers into explosive-laden, radio-controlled drones, capable of striking heavily fortified targets with pinpoint accuracy. As was common in World War II, wheels turned quickly. On June 26, 1944, Lieutenant General Jimmy Doolittle, now commanding 8th Air Force, approved the top-secret initiative known as Operation Aphrodite, and the 562nd Bomb Squadron immediately began modifying aircraft for the mission. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy pursued its own secretive project. Under the banner of Operation Anvil, the Navy modified consolidated PB-4Y-1 bombers into their version of assault drones. Yet, instead of cooperation between the branches, competition took hold as both teams raced to perfect their designs, unwilling to share innovations or methods that might have advanced the other's work. The technology. The 562nd Bomb Squadron wasted no time, transforming worn-out B-17 flying fortresses into explosive-laden drones named BQ-7s, or simply babies. Stripped of unnecessary equipment, the aircraft were streamlined to accommodate a two-man crew, a pilot and a flight engineer. The cockpits were modified with technological innovations cutting edge for their time, live video feedback, and explosive engineering into a single weapon system. 2 television cameras were installed inside the drone, one to monitor the instrument panel, and another to provide a clear view of the terrain below. These live feeds were transmitted to the mothership, allowing the remote pilots to guide the drone with greater accuracy. Additionally, the planes were outfitted with Azon radio remote control equipment, initially developed for guided bombs, allowing the mothership to steer the drones toward their targets. The drones packed a powerful punch of 20,000 pounds of Torpex, a highly potent explosive blend 50% more powerful than TNT. This massive payload not only increased the destructive potential of the aircraft, but also altered its center of gravity, requiring careful recalibration for stability in flight. The United States Navy adopted a similar approach, converting PB-4Y-1 bombers, a variant of the B-24 Liberator, into drones renamed BQ-8s. These too were loaded with Torpex and equipped with remote control systems. While the Navy initially tested the concept in Europe, the branch envisioned future potential missions in the Pacific theater, using these early drone experiments to refine its strategies. Training. After their conversion, the modified bombers from the Air Force were transferred to Bovington, where training began on July 1, 1944, under the strictest secrecy. The mission plan for Aphrodite was straightforward, yet risky. Because the drone, often painted yellow or white for visibility, could not take off on its own, the 2-person crew would have to manually handle the takeoff. Once airborne, they would guide the aircraft to an altitude of 2,000 feet, where control was handed over to the mothership. At this critical point, the crew would carefully arm the explosive payload and then parachute to safety, leaving the mothership to remotely guide the drone in its final stretch toward the target. Escort, observation, and decoy aircraft accompanied the mission to shield the mothership and ensure the drone safely reached its destination. For this, crews completed 25 hours of flight training, focusing on route navigation and mastering the Azon guidance system, which performed adequately despite persistent issues with the drone's stability. But Air Force commanders knew time was running out. The threat posed by the massive V-weapon launch sites under construction in Pas-de-Calais in occupied France created enormous pressure to launch missions as quickly as possible, leading to the Royal Air Force approving the emergency landing ground of Woodbridge in Suffolk due to its extra long runway. On July 7th, Lieutenant Colonel James Turner, commander of the Aphrodite unit, moved operations to Woodbridge with 10 B-17 drones, a B-17 command aircraft, 3 B-24 Liberators for guidance and observation, and 8 P-47 Thunderbolts for escort protection. Speed was critical, but weather delays in target areas proved a constant challenge. Finally, in early August, Operation Aphrodite was ready to launch. Initial missions. Operation Aphrodite began on August 4, 1944, as 4 modified B-17 drones departed from Woodbridge. But as the mission unfolded, chaos quickly replaced the calculated precision the operation had promised. The initial drone seemed to perform as planned. Its crew managed to bail out successfully, leaving control to the mothership. For a brief moment, all systems appeared to work. Then, without warning, the connection failed, and the BQ-7 veered off course, spiraled downward, and disappeared into the sea. Next, another drone faced disaster during the bailout phase. As the pilot leapt from the aircraft, he misjudged his altitude, jumping too low for his parachute to deploy. The unmanned bomber, now completely uncontrolled, crashed near the quiet village of Sudburn. A third drone barely made it off the ground before mechanical failures forced it to plummet almost immediately after takeoff. The final drone, however, stayed airborne longer than its predecessors, climbing steadily toward the heavily defended V-weapon complex at Waffenbezirnis. But just as it neared the target, bursts of German anti-aircraft fire ripped through its fuselage, and the drone plunged to the ground before reaching its objective. 2 days later, the Allies launched 3 more BQ-7 drones over northern France, but the results were no better. The crews bailed out as planned, but the radio guidance systems failed again. One drone spiraled into the sea, its mission over almost as soon as it began. Another, however, began to drift ominously toward the English town of Norwich. Fully armed with its massive payload, but without a pilot, the drone buzzed unpredictably across the countryside. People on the ground could do nothing but watch as it circled aimlessly, threatening disaster at every turn. At last, it sputtered and plunged into the sea, running out of fuel before causing any harm. A final model crossed the channel, but was shot down by anti-aircraft fire before reaching its target. With 2 outright catastrophic missions behind them, it was clear to commanders that the guidance systems had failed at every turn. The branch suspended Aphrodite to address these issues, leaving the entire operation's future hanging in the balance. Novel Wunderwaffe. While V-2 rockets struck terror across Allied cities, the Nazis were already secretly working on an even more chilling weapon, the V-3 supercannon. Known as the London Gun, this colossal underground artillery stretched an extraordinary 460 feet in length. This new Wunderwaffe's design aimed to launch 5 massive 300-pound shells every hour, each capable of traveling over 100 miles to its target. With an estimated muzzle velocity of nearly 5,000 feet per second, its reach had the potential to turn the English capital into a smoldering ruin. Construction of the supercannon began in the fall of 1943 in Mimoyac, France. Resistance reports soon alerted the Allies to its devastating potential, and in early July 1944, a Royal Air Force squadron struck the site with their massive tall-boy bombs, leaving deep craters and rendering the cannon completely inoperable before it could fire even once. Yet miscommunication within the Allied command left the US Navy unaware of the cannon's destruction. Acting on what was now outdated intelligence, naval planners proceeded with their own mission on this same target. On August 12th, the 2-person crew of Operation Anvil's first mission, pilot Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. and flight engineer Lieutenant Wilford J. Willy, jumped on board their heavily modified B-24 Liberator, now reclassified as the BQ-8 drone. The former, of course, was the oldest son of the former U.S. ambassador to Great Britain, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., while his younger brother, John F. Kennedy, had already served in the war. The pilots were tasked with delivering 21,170 pounds of Torpex on the heavily fortified fortress of Mimoyac in northern France. At precisely 6 p.m., 2 Lockheed Ventura motherships carrying the remote control equipment ascended from RAF Fursfield near Norwich, England. Moments later, Kennedy and Willy followed, piloting their drone into the evening sky. 2 P-38 Lightning fighters flew alongside as escorts, while a de Havilland Mosquito, piloted by Colonel Elliott Roosevelt, son of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, trailed behind to document the mission. The flight progressed smoothly as they reached 2,000 feet near the Blythe Estuary on England's North Sea coast. Kennedy and Willy stayed aboard as the drone made its first remote-controlled turn, ready for the next phase of the operation. With steady hands, the duo armed the payload, carefully removing the safety pin. Kennedy sent the signal to the mothership, his voice clear over the radio, quote, "Spade flush." It was the last thing he would ever say, as at 6:20 p.m., with no warning whatsoever, the drone erupted into a massive fireball. Debris rained down over the countryside, tearing through hundreds of trees and damaging over 100 properties. Even Colonel Roosevelt's Mosquito was struck by fragments of the explosion, though he managed to land safely. Sadly, the bodies of Kennedy and Willy were never recovered. Subsequent investigations suggested an electrical fault within the drone had triggered the torpex prematurely, obliterating both the aircraft and the men aboard before they could bail out. For their actions, Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. and Wilford Willy were posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, Distinguished Flying Cross, and Air Medal. The citation for Kennedy's Navy Cross reads, quote, "Well knowing the extreme dangers involved and totally unconcerned for his own safety, Kennedy unhesitatingly volunteered to conduct an exceptionally hazardous and special operational mission." The Kennedy family was devastated by Joseph's loss, but none more so than Joseph Sr. He had long envisioned his eldest son as the future president of the United States, the one to carry the family's legacy to the highest office. With Joseph Jr. gone, the weight of those ambitions shifted to the next in line, John F. Kennedy. The young man who had already made his mark during the war would eventually rise to lead the free world, if only for a brief time. No more. The Navy's final Anvil mission on September 3, 1944, targeted the German island of Heligoland. After a smooth takeoff and successful handover to the mothership, the BQ-8 drone veered off course near its target, crashing onto the neighboring island of Duna, sealing the program's fate. Meanwhile, after upgrading the control systems, the USAAF resumed Aphrodite missions in late 1944. The focus shifted from V-weapon sites to targets like U-boat pens and oil refineries, but the missions remained plagued with issues. Once again, control failures, poor weather, and heavy German anti-aircraft fire caused most to fail to reach their objectives, and successes were rare, leading to one final Aphrodite mission on January 1, 1945. Less than a month later, on January 27th, General Spot sent an urgent cablegram that stated, quote, "Aphrodite babies must not be launched against the enemy until further orders." But these orders never came. The Operation Aphrodite and Anvil programs ran for 15 missions total, but it was ultimately a disastrous failure. Instead of crippling enemy defenses, the bold missions did more harm to the Allies than to the Germans.